The grueling, agonizing transatlantic flight from the glamorous coast of Monaco back to the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles felt like an absolute eternity for John Finn Finnegan. Confined to the narrow, unforgiving seat of a commercial airliner, the handsome and dedicated doctor was entirely consumed by a suffocating, heavy blanket of profound regret and escalating panic. Every single time he dared to close his exhausted eyes, the horrifying, vivid image of his wife, Steffy Forrester Finnegan, violently throwing her wedding ring at his chest on the sun-drenched Mediterranean beach flashed brightly behind his eyelids, tormenting his waking moments and his fitful attempts at sleep. He had made a catastrophic, unforgivable error in judgment by allowing his biological mother, the relentlessly manipulative and incredibly dangerous Sheila Carter, to board his flight and infiltrate their sacred romantic sanctuary. Finn's desperate, misguided attempts to manage Sheila's presence in secret had backfired in the most spectacular and devastating way imaginable, leaving his once unshakable marriage hanging by the thinnest, most fragile thread. The echoing, thunderous reverberations of Ridge Forrester's volcanic, paternal rage still rang loudly and painfully in Finn's ears. Ridge had relentlessly berated his son-in-law in Monaco, placing the entirety of the blame for Steffy's shattered sense of safety and sudden disappearance squarely on Finn's broad, burdened shoulders. As the plane finally touched down on the tarmac at Lax, Finn did not even wait a single moment to collect his scattered thoughts. He sprinted through the bustling, crowded airport, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribcage. He knew Steffy's behavioral patterns intimately. When she was deeply wounded, traumatized, and fleeing from immense emotional pain, she invariably sought refuge within the familiar, imposing, and protective walls of Forrester Creations. Gripping the leather steering wheel of his car until his knuckles turned completely white, Finn navigated the chaotic, gridlocked Los Angeles traffic with a singular, burning mission: to find his beloved wife, beg for her absolute forgiveness on bended knee, and somehow piece their fractured, bleeding family back together before the catastrophic damage became permanent and irreversible. Unbeknownst to the frantic, guilt-ridden doctor racing desperately across the city, the lavish executive CEO office at Forrester Creations had already transformed into a dark sanctuary of shared grief, intoxicating liquor, and forbidden, scandalous passion. The heavy, sweet scent of premium bourbon hung thickly and oppressively in the air, mingling seamlessly with the palpable, suffocating weight of profound, life-altering regret. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, her usually impeccable and flawless appearance now deeply disheveled and frantic, sat in a state of absolute emotional paralysis. Beside her was Carter Walton, the company's highly trusted coup, and a man who was currently drowning in his own vast, suffocating ocean of despair following the sudden, heartbreaking departure of his wife, Daphne Rose Walton, to Paris. Brought together by the magnetic pull of their mirrored devastation, Steffy desperately fleeing the lingering trauma of Sheila's relentless stalking and Finn's ultimate betrayal, and Carter mourning the tragic loss of his dreams of fatherhood and marital bliss. The two deeply vulnerable friends had crossed the ultimate, unforgivable line in a moment of sheer, intoxicating weakness. The physical culmination of their shared sorrow and alcohol-fueled desperation had left them both breathless, terrified, and profoundly altered. As they hastily and clumsily attempted to pull themselves together, the immense gravity of their scandalous, steamy encounter crashed down upon them like a violent, unstoppable tidal wave. They were trapped in a dangerously intimate proximity, their bodies still betraying the lingering, undeniable heat of their forbidden physical connection. Steffy's hands trembled violently as she tried to smooth her wrinkled, askew clothing, her brilliant mind racing with the catastrophic, explosive implications of what they had just done in the heart of her family's empire. Carter, his dark eyes hollow with a complex mixture of overwhelming guilt and lingering, protective affection, reached out to gently steady her shaking, fragile frame. It was a gesture born of deep, genuine empathy and an overwhelming rescuer complex, a desperate, instinctive attempt to comfort a woman who was just as broken and lost as he was. They were currently locked in a frantic, hushed, and panicked conversation, desperately swearing a solemn pact of absolute silence to bury their explosive, marriage-destroying secret forever. The heavy, ornate mahogany doors of the Forrester Creations executive suite stood as the only remaining barrier between Finn's desperate, clinging hope and a devastating, world-shattering reality. Finn sprinted down the lavishly decorated, silent hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly and rhythmically against the polished marble floors. He bypassed the empty reception desk without a second glance, his mind singularly and obsessively focused on the woman he loved more than life itself. He did not bother to knock, the sheer urgency coursing through his veins demanded immediate, forceful action. With a powerful, determined shove, Finn threw the heavy double doors wide open, stepping boldly into the dimly lit sanctuary, fully prepared to drop to his knees and offer a tearful, impassioned, and desperate plea for the survival of his marriage. He had rehearsed the exact words 1,000 times during his agonizing, sleepless flight, ready to promise Steffy the absolute moon and stars, and fiercely vowing to eradicate the looming shadow of Sheila Carter from their existence permanently. However, the carefully rehearsed words died instantly and painfully in Finn's throat, immediately replaced by a suffocating, icy dread that paralyzed his entire muscular frame. The shocking scene that unfolded before his widened, horrified eyes was a vivid, undeniable tableau of absolute, gut-wrenching betrayal. Steffy and Carter were standing agonizingly close to one another in the center of the room, frozen in a posture of undeniable, shocking intimacy that sent a physical jolt of pain through Finn's chest. Carter's strong hands were lingering gently and protectively on Steffy's bare arms, his posture overly familiar and deeply possessive. Steffy's beautiful face was flushed a deep crimson, her dark hair wildly tousled, and her designer clothing slightly askew in a manner that screamed loudly of recent, frantic, and unbridled passion. The overwhelming, pungent stench of hard alcohol violently assaulted Finn's acute senses, confirming beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was not a late-night professional meeting, but a deeply personal, intoxicated, and highly inappropriate encounter. The air in the expansive room was thick with a heavy, guilty awkwardness that practically vibrated with the devastating truth of what had just transpired behind those closed, locked doors. For a fraction of an agonizing second, the entire universe seemed to stand completely still as Finn's brilliant medical mind struggled to process the devastating visual data presenting itself before him. The awkward, deeply guilty expressions plastered across both Steffy and Carter's faces were a glaring, undeniable, and silent confession of their sins. The scattered pieces of the horrifying puzzle slammed together with sickening, crystal-clear precision. His beloved wife, the fiercely loyal woman who had just hours ago thrown her sacred wedding ring at him in a fit of righteous indignation over his connection to Sheila, had fled across the globe only to immediately seek illicit solace in the strong arms of another man. The searing, blinding pain of absolute betrayal pierced directly through Finn's heart, instantly mutating the profound guilt, fear, and desperation he had carried all the way from Monaco into a volatile, uncontrollable, and explosive inferno of absolute, primal jealousy. What the hell is going on here? Finn's voice boomed through the expansive, dimly lit office, the sheer volume and ferocity of his tone completely shattering the heavy, guilty silence that had enveloped the room. He stepped aggressively further into the space, his dark eyes darting frantically and furiously between his disheveled, panicking wife and the man he had always considered a trusted friend and respected colleague. Steffi gasped sharply, instinctively stepping back from Carter's touch, her shaking hands flying to her mouth in a dramatic gesture of pure, unadulterated panic. "Finn, you're supposed to be in Monaco," she stammered weakly, her voice trembling violently. With the intoxicating effects of the bourbon and the sheer, paralyzing terror of being caught in the act, her complete inability to formulate a coherent, innocent defense only served to pour massive amounts of gasoline on the raging, uncontrollable fire of Finn's mounting, violent fury. Finn's gaze locked intensely onto Carter, his eyes narrowing into deadly, venomous slits that promised immediate retribution. The sight of the handsome, imposing coup standing there with an air of protective, unapologetic defiance pushed Finn entirely over the emotional edge, stripping away his usual calm demeanor. "You son of a bitch," Finn snarled, his voice dripping with a dangerous, uncharacteristic malice that echoed menacingly off the glass walls. "She is in crisis. She is deeply traumatized, incredibly vulnerable, and clearly intoxicated out of her mind, and you decide that this is the perfect, opportune moment to prey on her, to take advantage of my wife when she is at her absolute lowest, most fragile point." Finn's furious accusations flew across the room like jagged, poisoned daggers, painting Carter not as a grieving friend seeking mutual comfort, but as a calculated, opportunistic, and malicious predator who had intentionally exploited Steffi's fragile psychological state for his own selfish, romantic gain. Carter Walton was not a man easily intimidated by anyone, and he was currently operating under his own incredibly heavy, suffocating burden of profound emotional devastation. The sudden, heartbreaking loss of Daphne, who had tragically fled to Paris after receiving her devastating infertility diagnosis, had left Carter feeling completely hollowed out, reckless, and deeply resentful of the unfairness of the universe. He had spent the entire evening drowning in his own bottomless grief, only to find a kindred, shattered spirit in Steffi's shared sorrow. Finn's aggressive, highly insulting accusation struck a raw, agonizing nerve deep within Carter's soul. Carter's own profound grief and fierce protective instincts instantly flared to vibrant life. He absolutely refused to cower before the man whose catastrophic, naive failures had driven Steffi into this desperate, broken state of despair in the very first place. "Don't you dare project your massive, unforgivable failures onto me, Finn," Carter roared back, his deep, resonant voice echoing powerfully off the sleek glass walls of the executive suite, matching Finn's volume and intensity. He stepped forward aggressively, placing his large frame squarely between Finn and a trembling, weeping Steffi, a physical manifestation of his absolute refusal to back down or apologize. "You have absolutely no right to walk in here and play the righteous, protective, devoted husband. Not after what you did. You brought that psychopath, Sheila Carter, right to her doorstep in Monaco. You allowed that monster to terrorize your wife, to shatter her sense of safety, and to destroy your family from the inside out. You don't deserve her, Finn. You forfeited the right to protect her the exact moment you chose Sheila over your own damn marriage." Carter's brutally honest, piercing words hit Finn with the concussive, devastating force of a runaway freight train. The undeniable, painful truth laced within Carter's furious declaration the harsh reality that Finn's own naive actions had paved the direct way for this marital disaster was simply too agonizing for the good doctor to bear in his current state. The explosive, toxic combination of blinding romantic jealousy, suffocating personal guilt, and primal, territorial rage entirely short-circuited Finn's usually calm, rational, and composed demeanor. With a guttural, terrifying roar of pure, unadulterated anguish and fury, Finn lunged forward with explosive speed. He closed the tense distance between them in a mere fraction of a second, his right fist flying through the air with devastating, unchecked, and lethal velocity. The sickening, visceral crack of solid bone against bone echoed sharply and violently through the room as Finn's clenched fist connected squarely and brutally with Carter's strong jaw. The sheer, unbridled force of the unexpected, explosive blow sent the towering Ku stumbling backward, his heavy frame crashing violently into a sleek, expensive glass-topped side table. The designer table shattered instantly upon impact, sending a loud, chaotic cascade of jagged, glittering shards raining down across the plush, expensive carpet. Steffi let out a blood-curdling, terrified scream, her hands flying to her ears to block out the noise as the pristine, professional sanctuary of Forrester Creations was instantly and violently transformed into a chaotic, brutal war zone of masculine aggression. But Carter Walton was built like a heavyweight prizefighter, and the sudden, intense physical pain only served to ignite the volatile, reckless anger that had been simmering just beneath his calm surface all night. Wiping a sudden, bright smear of crimson blood from the corner of his split, swelling lip, Carter's dark eyes burned with a fierce, unapologetic, and dangerous intensity. He did not hesitate for a single fleeting second. Pushing himself aggressively off the ruined, jagged remnants of the shattered table, Carter launched his massive frame directly at Finn. He tackled the doctor with the unstoppable force of a battering ram, driving Finn backward with incredible momentum until they both slammed violently into the heavy, solid mahogany of the CEO's grand, imposing desk. The physical altercation rapidly and frighteningly devolved into a brutal, chaotic, and bloody brawl, a terrifying physical manifestation of the immense emotional wreckage that had entirely consumed all of their intertwined lives. Fists flew with reckless, desperate, and punishing abandon as the two strong men grappled, punched, and shoved one another across the expansive, luxurious office. Expensive, irreplaceable fashion sketches, delicate imported fabric swatches, and heavy crystal decanters were swept violently off the desk, crashing to the floor in a loud symphony of total destruction. The pungent, sharp smell of spilled, expensive bourbon mixed sickeningly with the metallic, coppery scent of fresh blood as Finn and Carter traded devastating, punishing blows, each violent strike fueled by their respective heartbreak, blinding jealousy, and profound sense of ultimate betrayal. "Stop it! Both of you, stop it right now!" Steffi screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, her voice hoarse, ragged, and filled with absolute, paralyzing terror. She stood frozen on the periphery of the senseless violence, trapped in a horrific waking nightmare as the two men she cared deeply for tore each other apart in front of her very eyes. Her mind was a swirling, chaotic vortex of intense panic and crushing guilt. She knew with sickening certainty that she was the direct catalyst for this explosive violence, that her scandalous, forbidden, and alcohol-fueled affair with Carter had ignited a deadly powder keg that was now actively threatening to destroy everything she held dear in this world. She desperately wanted to intervene, to throw her fragile body between them, but the sheer ferocity and danger of their brawl made it physically impossible to safely approach the warring, enraged men. The once immaculate, highly curated executive office was rapidly being reduced to absolute, unrecognizable ruins. A heavy, designer floor lamp was violently knocked over, its expensive bulb shattering loudly as it plunged half the spacious room into dramatic, flickering, and ominous shadows. Finn, fueled by the primal adrenaline of a husband defending his perceived territory and honor, managed to land another solid, bruising blow to Carter's exposed ribs. But Carter, driven by the raw, unyielding agony of losing Daphne and his fierce, boiling resentment of Finn's continuous, naive betrayals regarding Sheila, retaliated with a powerful, sweeping hook that sent Finn crashing hard into a display of expensive, custom mannequins. The hollow, plastic figures toppled over like dominoes, their limbs tangling awkwardly with the fighting men in a surreal, chaotic, and destructive dance. As Finn scrambled desperately to his feet, breathing heavily and raggedly, a stream of dark blood trickling steadily from a deep cut above his brow, he prepared to launch himself at Carter once again. Carter stood his ground firmly, his broad chest heaving with exertion, his large fists raised and ready to defend himself and the terrified woman cowering behind him. The atmosphere in the destroyed room was thick with palpable violence, the emotional tension stretched so incredibly tightly it threatened to snap the very fabric of their reality. But just as the two battered men prepared to collide for another brutal, unforgiving round of combat, the heavy double doors of the executive suite were suddenly forcefully thrown wide open, freezing everyone in their tracks. The sudden, blinding influx of bright, fluorescent light from the outer hallway illuminated the absolute, horrifying devastation within the once pristine office. Standing completely frozen in the open doorway, their faces absolute masks of pure, unadulterated shock, confusion, and dawning horror, was the formidable brain trust of the Forrester family. Ridge Forrester, Brooke Logan Forrester, and Eric Forrester stood absolutely paralyzed, their eyes wide as saucers as they took in the catastrophic, bloody scene before them. They had been drawn to the CEO suite by the terrifying, unmistakable sounds of shattering glass, breaking furniture, and Steffy's desperate, echoing screams, completely and utterly unprepared for the violent, scandalous reality they had just walked in on. The silence that immediately followed the interruption was deafening, heavier, and vastly more suffocating than the brutal violence that had just preceded it. Ridge's intense, protective eyes darted rapidly from the blooded, panting, and bruised forms of Finn, and Carter to the deeply disheveled, intoxicated, and utterly terrified figure of his daughter, Steffy. The intimate, highly compromising context of the situation was absolutely impossible to ignore or explain away. The overwhelming smell of spilled bourbon, the ruined, askew clothing, the sheer, primal jealousy radiating from Finn's every pore, it all painted a devastatingly clear, undeniable, and horrific picture. The explosive, world-shattering secret of Steffy and Carter's forbidden, alcohol-fueled affair, which they had desperately sworn to bury just moments prior, was now dangerously, precariously close to being exposed to the entire stunned Forrester dynasty.